Thank you and welcome to my channel. If this is your first time viewing, I do a lot of war game simulation. A lot of it's based on nuclear simulation, but it's not sum total. And sometimes I do what I consider more of a high level thing, and sometimes it's more of a deep dive study. And tonight's video is going to be more of a high level thing, and I'll follow up with a more of a deep dive, which is going to go into more of their separate strategic forces and different targets and priorities and posture stances and some recent developments. But this is going to be more high level, just kind of a demonstrative video. So if you're interested in more of a deeper dive, check it out. That'll come down here in a little bit. So one thing I haven't done before is looked at what would a nuclear conflict between Russia and China look like, potentially. And I know a lot of people are going to see this, and there's, comes to online stuff, and especially anything geopolitical, there's so many fanboys, bots, just weirdness that goes on sometimes. So you get a lot of very extreme thoughts and everything. And, in my own videos, I've been accused of being pro-Russian, anti-Russian, and everything in between. And I really don't get into the very much at all into the why or you know who's right, who's wrong, because I always say in geopolitics there are no good or bad guys. There's just a lot of blood on a lot of different people's hands. And anyone that thinks, well, Russia and China are allies now, so there's no way they would ever go to war. First off, when it comes to geopolitics, things can change. You had historical enemies like France and Britain, who fought many, many wars against each other and then were allies for many wars. You still have geopolitical conflict in Europe, which is one thing that probably more than anything else that helped to keep a unified front against Russia, if in fact you believe that there should be a unified front against Russia. And so things can change. You have shared land borders. You have regions of people, trying to assert control. You have influence, spheres of influence. Right now, they have what they consider probably both a unifying idea that reducing the United States geopolitical influence, and that keeps them, it's kind of like number 2 and number 3. And again, don't hold on to those numbers, but kind of more like, well, let's focus on number 1. But that doesn't mean 2 and 3 are always going to be at best of friends, and things can change and relationships can change. So this looks at a scenario, and we'll kind of start with what the Russian side will look like. Here is, you always have, anytime you have strikes, you have counter value and counter force. Counter force are geared towards military locations, and counter value is more targeting cities and industrials. You see a massive amount of strikes here coming inbound from Russia. Just so overwhelming, you really can't even, what are you going to do? Try to pinpoint these locations. And then you have counter force against military locations, Chinese nuclear sites, etc. And then you have Chinese retaliation. Now, China, having a smaller strategic rocket force, is going to put 100% of their concentration into counter value strikes versus counter force, just because the disparity. Now, China is bridging the gap on their strategic rocket forces. Their recent parade showcased some additional nuclear weapons. Certainly, it was trying to send a message probably to the United States over a little thing called, well, depending on what you want to call it, Taiwan, Republic of China. It's a whole other video on that. But here's the retaliatory strikes. And so these are all going to kind of run simultaneous just to keep the video from being too long. And like I said, the next one will be a deep dive. But this just look high level. if they were to get into a conflict, it's kind of compressing time instead of having a certain level of escalation. It's just going all in, all out. And like I said, we'll kind of focus on the other stuff later. So I'm going to execute all plans. We'll start this kind of fast, and we'll kind of work our way down a little bit. So you have strikes starting. You have sub-launch ballistic missiles. You have mobile launchers. You have ICBM silos on the Russian side and on the Chinese side. I need to do some updates on the Chinese forces based on the most recent numbers, but they should be fairly accurate to give you an idea right now. I haven't seen any indication that the new Sarmat missiles from Russia have been any more reliable. I think out of the 6 most recent tests, 5 of them were failures. So certainly I put a certain higher level of failure rate within those missiles. Other missile tests have been more successful, so I'm certainly not one of those people that are going to say, well, none of Russians' missiles are going to work. That would just be completely ridiculous to think that. But you need to factor in some level of testing failures. We're going to zoom in and see some of the explosions here. So we have multiple warheads coming in. Their close proximity means that it's not like United States and Russia or United States and China, where a lot of their weaponry is going to be a good 30 minutes out from strikes. Now, ballistic missile subs can get closer, but by and large, the mobile launchers, the ICBMs, it's going to take about 30 minutes from targeting to landing in strikes. Much quicker time frame here. We see one landing in Moscow right now. We see a ton. So even though the Chinese strategic forces are less, you're still seeing a ton of warheads come in. So we'll get a bird's eye view, but I'm going to see that there's definitely ones coming. Zoom in a little bit here. China has a massive amount of population overall, and it's heavily concentrated along its eastern kind of seaboard. Russia does not, outside of a few select locations like Moscow, St. Petersburg, it doesn't have that same, it's much more concentrated into a smaller level of areas and not nearly the population size. So one effect, you're going to see that the casualties for the Chinese side are going to be much higher because they have a much larger population and more densely populated areas. And not to mention the Russian warhead forces are much larger. All right, so I think we're kind of wrapping up. Let's go ahead and get these final little things going on here. We got some sub-launched nuclear cruise missiles from the Russian side. We have some strategic bombers. I don't think the casualties are going to be, ton higher at this point because they've already landed so many warheads. Even with some malfunctioning and some missing targets, etc., still going to have just a huge amount of devastation. Let's go ahead and take a look at our casualties here. This is the first video I put out for a while. I was experimenting using some different sims and been doing a lot of combat mission, playing a lot of combat mission, Black Sea, which is very addicting, but they don't translate to very good videos. Okay, so we're looking at 6.3% of the Russian population, 9 million. Hong Kong, which they're modeling separately, even though it is a part of China, 1.2 million, 17% of their population, 216 million, which is 16% of the Chinese population. You also have casualties in Taiwan, a little bit in Vietnam, North Korea, Macau, Laos, very few in Laos. High level, 226 million, and about half that, actually, so halfway to 227 million. 41 million eventual cancer fatalities, over 6 million square kilometers evacuated. So imagine how quickly that loss of life, just instantaneous, and what kind of impact that would have. I mean, China is a manufacturing powerhouse. You're not going to be much of a manufacturing powerhouse after this. So imagine the impact that's going to have across the world with distribution of goods. And we saw with COVID just how, even with that, the impact it had. Just looking at short-term fallout, long-term fallout. Definitely, I mean, you have it across both, but certainly a larger concentration across China. You see, I'm not sure where Taiwan, maybe in some of the islands, they got some of their casualties. We see a little bit of crossing over into North Korea, accounting for some of their casualties. And then Laos. So just a sobering reality. And again, this was kind of high level, demonstrative. Could have been tweaked, could have been concentration of more warheads against St. Petersburg and Russia, and probably gotten a few more casualties against the Russian side. But again, wanted to represent just a widespread strike against multiple targets. And the next video will go more in depth into their forces, some of their current geopolitical stances, and some of the modernization efforts of the Chinese, and the Russians for that matter, of their strategic nuclear forces, and what that means for geopolitical stability across the world. And some fascinating stuff, because it certainly seemed like China for a long time kept what we considered a minimum deterrence, right around the level of the French nuclear forces. And they've definitely increased that number. And it would seem largely due to a perception or a belief that the United States wasn't taking their nuclear strategic forces serious enough as a deterrent. And so they're definitely increasing it, and they displayed some new nuclear weapons on their parade, unless you're one of those people that believe all they did was just repaint some existing rockets. But I'm one of those people that I wouldn't want to dismiss anything outright. So, and traditionally, China has on their parades demonstrate stuff that's operationally deployed. Not saying that's exactly the case this time, because again, postures can change, and they have changed, just like their minimum deterrence to move into a more of a trying to get closer to a parity level with the United States and Russia. So we'll see. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like the video, leave me a comment, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and have a great day. Thank you.